Start this. Alright, so chapter 50, as you can see, guys, chapter 50, as you can see, the single sheet of paper, very, very short. So it's just an introduction to ecology. So definition of ecology, the study of interactions between organisms. So organism to organism, either with the same species or different species, and with their external environment. So the environment, what that includes are things called abiotic factors. The word abiotic means non-living. So abiotic factors in the environment would be like weather, temperature, water, rocks, soil, and biotic factors would be all the living things. So from bacteria to fungi to all the different types of animals and plants. And so the second section here is about how the environment and or organisms can limit the distribution of a species. So a species, necessarily where they live or how they're distributed in their environment, can be limited by other organisms. So other organisms like competition for resources and so on can limit where those organisms live. Predators can limit where the resources are, and so we're going to look at just here a few things that limit the distribution. And so biotic factors that can do that, so the living things that can limit the distribution of organisms would be interactions with other species. Some of those interactions could be like predation. I just used that example, where a predator can affect where their prey live, or vice versa. The predator will be where the prey is. Competition for resources can limit, and so sometimes organisms that compete for the same resources can find themselves coexisting if they use different parts of the resource. So they've found, like in certain species of birds, they occupy the same kind of tree, but they may occupy different levels of the tree, and so it allows them to coexist together, but that affects the distribution. Whereas if you took one species out and that part of the tree opened up, another species could use more of the tree. Other things that limit the distribution are the presence of parasites or pathogens, and so also the presence of pollinators. If it's a plant, pollinators. A plant species relies on pollinators to take the pollen from one plant to another, and so a plant species is not going to really live in an area where there's no pollinators to pollinate it. So therefore the presence of pollinators will limit where those plants can live. And the same thing for animals with the food species. If there's no food in the area, organisms aren't going to live there. So those all affect the distribution of where they live. And that distribution could be in a small area, like where they live in the ocean, or in a small forest, versus globally as well. So this is a specific case of a biotic factor affecting the distribution of another species. A specific case of an herbivore limiting distribution of a food species. And so, so what they did, this was an experiment that was done. In the ocean, you have these things called limpets and sea urchins. And they live with seaweed as well, and so they wanted to do a study to see what effects these two organisms have on the seaweed. They eat the seaweed, by the way. All right, so we have our graph. Let's look at what's on the graph. So this is over time, over a few years, and this is the seaweed cover. And there are 4 lines on the graph. It's hard for you guys, I think, to see the 2 lines down here at the bottom of your graph. So the red line, the bottom line there, that's your control group. So this is in the ocean where both the sea urchin and the limpets are present, and you can see that when both of them are present, the growth of the seaweed is not right, so this is the percent of seaweed cover of that particular area. So they're looking at a particular area and it's not covered with seaweed. And so they wanted to see, okay, obviously something is reducing the seaweed cover. Is it the limpets or the sea urchins? And so they did an experiment. So and that's what the lines are. These other three lines are the experimental part. So there's kind of three experimental groups. So they removed both of them. And so when they removed both of them from that area, they saw the seaweed growth go up. Then they took and removed just one of them. So they removed only the sea urchins, and the seaweed growth went up. So they left the limpets. And then the green line down here, they only removed the limpets and left the sea urchins. All right, so they left the sea urchins there. So my question to you is which organism seems to limit the distribution of the seaweed cover? Which one has the greatest effect on the seaweed cover? The limpets or the sea urchins? And how do you know? Hannah?
Wouldn't it be the sea urchins, because we only the sea urchins were removed to change by the greatest factor, and then we both the limpets went up more, but not at the same rate.
That's correct. All right. And then you can see when the limpets were only, or the sea urchins were only there, it didn't grow. Yeah, absolutely. So the sea urchins seem to have, so the biggest difference there between both of them removed and the control. So the sea urchins seem to have the greatest effect. The limpets, when they were removed, it didn't really change much. All right. And so therefore, that's an example of a biotic factor. An herbivore, something that eats plants, limits, in this case here, the distribution of seaweed. And so the seaweed without the sea urchins would cover a larger area of the space. All right, and then abiotic factors can also limit the distribution of organisms as well. So those abiotic factors that could limit the distribution would be things like temperature. So you can think globally about temperature where it's cold versus warmer versus hot. Different organisms live in those areas, and so temperature definitely plays a role in that. Water and the availability of water. So certain organisms live and can need less water than others and have adaptations that allow them to live in areas with less water. A cactus would be an example of that. Sunlight can limit the distribution of organisms. So if you have a big forest and with a lot of trees, the trees will block the sunlight. And so on the bottom of a forest floor, there's not every organism can live there, like plants, speaking of plants, not everything could live on the bottom of the forest floor because the big trees filter out a lot of the sunlight, and so therefore plants that need a lot of sunlight and require that would not be able to live there. Plants that don't need a lot of sunlight would be able to live there, so it limits the distribution. Wind as well. Wind, if the area is very flat and very windy, nothing to block the wind. Plants that have very fragile stems or that grow tall may not be able to live there because the wind would snap them every time, and so therefore it limits the types of organisms that live there. And rocks and soil. So the contents of the soil, so certain plants need certain nutrients and so on. Some plants need more of acidic soil than a basic soil. Some plants can't grow in acidic soil, and so that limits the distribution. Rocks, rocky soils, or just rocks in general. Some organisms can't live on rocks, some can. There's things called lichen that we're going to talk about a little bit later that actually can grow on rock. Everybody's filtering in from them stuff. And talking about distribution distribution of organisms, I wanted to talk a minute about how we as humans affect the distribution of organisms. We as humans affect things in ecosystems a lot. We do different things, and one of these things is we transplant species from one place to another. So a species transplant are organisms that are either intentionally or accidentally relocated from their original distribution. So we can bring plants to a new area because we think they're pretty. We can accidentally bring organisms, like on ships, from one place to another. There's a little fish called the goby that was brought into the Great Lakes through ballast water, which is in a ship. There's these holes that allow water to come in and out to help to balance the ship, especially when cargo is released. It'll put water in the ship to help with the balancing. And so these little gobies, the larvae, they're bottom dwellers. They live on the bottom of lakes, but when they lay eggs and their larva is on the top. And so when the ships were taking in water, they would take the larvae of these gobies from one place, and then the ships came. So this was near Europe, and they brought the larvae of these gobies, which then grew and turned into fish, and then came into the Great Lakes, and that ballast water they take in and out, so they let it out, and these fish got into actually the St. Clair River, which feeds into the Great Lakes, and they began to replicate kind of uncontrollably. Why would they replicate uncontrollably?
They have no predators.
Yeah, that there's no natural predators, then they begin to replicate, and then that poses a problem to the ecosystem. Why? Because they're taking up resources and things like that of the native organisms. And so that's what the second bullet was about, that they can disrupt the communities that are currently there to which they've been introduced. And sometimes we call these, instead of transplant species, we call them invasive species because they are invading the new area. And they're not really invasive, it's that we've caused them to move into a new spot. Another example is kudzu. You guys don't have this, but this picture. Kudzu, if you've ever driven south, down 75 towards Florida, there's this vine called kudzu that was transplanted. This picture here shows you trees, but all of this carpet of green, it's not actually the trees, it's actually a vine that covers up and covers actually the trees. Anybody ever seen this in the sun? All right. So that's an invasive species, and it's everywhere. All right, and it kind of grows out of control. There's nothing to limit it, and it, in this case here, hurts the trees. It blocks the sunlight. It gets the sunlight to the leaves of the tree, and so on. So that's just another example of an invasive species. Okay, and that's chapter 50 in a nutshell, guys. All right, so very, very short. So we're going to go ahead and just move on to 51. And 51, so this was just an intro about how organisms limit the distribution. 51 is we're going to look at behavior. And so behavior, it's titled, if you look at the title of the chapter, it says animal behavior. I threw in some plant stuff as well, just to show that plants also have some behaviors, and we're going to talk about why that is, and how the environment signals different behaviors, both in animals as well as in plants. And so, let me switch presentations here. So there's a whole part of biology about ecology, and then in ecology there's a whole part called behavioral ecology, where you're looking at the behavior of animals, and like I said, I threw in some plants here, the study of the ecological basis, so the role of that behavior in the ecosystem, as well as the evolutionary basis for the behavior. How does it help the organism, kind of natural selection there? And So people who study behavioral ecology, it says integrates proximate and ultimate explanations for animal behavior. Those are fancy words for how and why. So how does the behavior happen and why does it happen? So we're going to look at the how here in a little bit, and integrate into the why. So sometimes that is triggered by genetics and environmental factors. So physiological responses to environmental cues. So this means, physiological means a response inside the body or the being. So it could be a plant, it could be an animal, and that's triggered by something going on in the environment. So, so in animals, internal and external signals regulate a variety of physiological responses that synchronize with environmental cycles and cues. So this could be, well, in this chapter we'll talk about what triggers animals to migrate at certain times of the year. So that's an environmental cycle and cue. So we'll talk about temperature and daylight. Also, there are physiological responses that happen with a 24-hour cycle in our day. And so that's what I want to talk about right now is these behavioral rhythms. Some animal behavior is affected by the animal's what we call circadian rhythm, a daily cycle of rest and activity. If you've had psychology, anybody ever have psychology and learned about circadian rhythms? Yes? All right. So we are, as humans, our circadian rhythm is about 24 hours. All right, 24-hour cycle. And what happens is at night, our body produces a hormone called melatonin, and that triggers restfulness and sleep, and then that hormone goes down towards the morning and into the daytime, which then we're more active, all right? And so then we have this cycle of 24 hours, and that's our circadian rhythm. And they found that the rhythm persists in constant conditions. Example, constant darkness, with a period of about 24 hours. Actually, they found if they put like humans in complete darkness, it's a little bit more than 24 hours, but still you have the same cycle of producing the melatonin and so on, and the cycle of rest and activity with or without the presence of light. And so, so that's an example of a behavioral rhythm. And because of these circadian rhythms, this is why we experience jet lag when we travel to a different time zone. Anybody ever experienced jet lag? Okay. So yeah. So obviously, the more different the time is, the more drastic the jet lag is. But like we're in the Eastern time zone here in Michigan. You travel to California, it's a 3-hour difference. And so when you travel, your body, for a short period of time, if you're gone for like a week, that's not enough time to adjust. And so what happens is your body is on a circadian rhythm 24 hours according to where you live. And so therefore you go to another place that has, like I said, California, 3-hour difference. And your body's still on that same circadian rhythm that it was in the Eastern time zone, so you're still producing the hormones to induce sleep at roughly at the same time, and so on, so you feel sleepy when you should be awake, or vice versa. What happens, though, is your circadian rhythm does have the ability to adjust to wherever you live. So, like if you up and moved across the globe to where it's like dark out right now, it's not like for the rest of your life you'd want to stay awake in the middle of the night. Your circadian rhythm will adjust to the environmental cues around you, and you can change that. It just takes a little bit of time. So usually on vacations, you're not there long enough, or the longer you stay, it adjusts a little bit. But if you go just for a weekend, it's really hard. All right. So that's your circadian rhythms, and that's an example of a behavioral rhythm. Another behavioral rhythm would be when animals migrate and reproduce. And that can be linked in some animals to changing seasons, and so some animals have a breeding season or migrate at certain times of the year, and we'll talk more specifically. I'm just introducing those now. We'll talk about migration specifically a little bit later and the triggers that affect that behavior. And so daylight and darkness are common seasonal cues. They're not the only ones, so temperature, length of day can be also seasonal cues. So I want to give an example. So of a behavioral response to an external signal with plants. So I gave some examples there with animals, but plants also respond to external cues. And one example is with light. So Charles Darwin, we know him from evolution. Well, he also did some work with plants. He's a busy guy. All right, so he did some experiments on plants, and he discovered and found this phenomenon called phototropism. So photo means light, and so it's the plant's response to light. And him and his son Francis observed that a seedling, when it's growing, had the ability to bend towards the light. But they also, when they saw that plants could bend towards the light, it intrigued them, and so they did some experiments. And what they found is that the tip of the plant is key for the bending of the light. So the tip of the coleoptile is just the young plant. It's just a fancy name for the young plant. So they found that it only bent if the top or the tip of the plant was present. And they hypothesized or postulated that a signal was transmitted from the tip to the region that elongated, to the elongating region. And that'll make sense here as we look at this next picture. So I don't think your picture is labeled on this, so I'm going to give you a second to label that while I do that. And quickly mention. I'll come around and get the rest of them at the next picture. Let's talk about this picture. All right, so here's the seed. It's breaking out of the seed coat. Here's the roots. This is the plant, and here's the light source, and it's bending towards the light. And this shows you, if we were to enlarge and look at the cells, this shows you actually what's going on in the cells of that plant. Do you notice that the cells on the lighted side, the illuminated side, look at the size compared to the cells here. So what happens is why they bend towards the light is that the cells on the shaded side actually elongate. So therefore, like if before it bends, if my two hands are the two sides of the plant, all the cells are the same size. And so what happens is when the light shines on this side, these guys don't change. These guys become elongated. So they, this side gets longer than this side. And so these cells, they're still the same number of cells. They just get longer. And so this side gets longer. This side stays the same shape. And so therefore you get this bending. And so the bending is caused by the elongation on the shaded side of the plant. And so that's what they figured out. And so to figure out, they were wondering why this occurs and what's the physiology behind it that's causing that to happen in the plant. And so therefore they continued their experiment and they wanted to see, they hypothesized that there was, that the tip was involved. So they did 4 different things. So they're showing you the light coming this way, but they put light on each one of these, so the light is coming in on each one of these scenarios from the left-hand side. So they snipped off the tip here, no tip, and notice here, in the presence of light, no bending, so it stays straight. Then, this is another one where it did. You guys want a minute to write these? I forgot that it's not labeled on yours. So I'll give you a minute to write this before I explain so you can listen up. Come around and check out the rest of it. Oh, and then the And opaque, you guys, that second one, opaque means the light can't get through. So if you don't know what that means, that's what that means. Alright, now we can talk about it. So then the tip part here that, in this case here, the tip is left intact, but they put a cap on it to block so that the light hits the rest of the plant but not the tip. And notice that the plant grows straight up, so that tells